In the shadowed elegance of Embassy Row, a diplomat lies dead, strangled by a silk scarf in his own drawing room. For suspects a distant wife, a nervous secretary, a loyal guard, and a desperate cousin each hide secrets as tangled as the knot that ended Sir Reginald Harrow's life. Enter Miss Jane Marple, an unassuming spinster with a razor-sharp mind, unraveling a web of espionage, betrayal, and coded ciphers. As whispers of a foreign plot surface, only one truth will emerge from the clues of a scratched floor, an empty ashtray, and a stopped clock. Who wielded the scarf, and what secrets cost a man his life? The answer lies in the quiet of Upper Cranston, where nothing is as it seems. Chapter 1. The house on Embassy Row. The late summer sun cast long shadows over Upper Cranston, a town whose Georgian charm masked a quiet appetite for secrets. Embassy Row, a crescent of stately homes, was its crown jewel, and at its heart stood the residence of Sir Reginald Harrow, a diplomat whose name carried weight in Whitehall's hushed corridors. The house, with its ivy-clad facade and tall sash windows, exuded an air of serene authority until the morning when death slipped through its doors. Miss Jane Marple, visiting her old friend, Lady Beatrice Conway, had arrived in Upper Cranston for a respite from St. Mary Mead's predictable rhythms. Lady Conway, a widow of sharp wit and sharper tongue, lived in a neat villa a stone's throw from Embassy Row. Over tea, she regaled Miss Marple with tales of the town's luminaries, but her tone shifted when Sir Reginald's name arose. Dreadful business, Jane," she said, her eyes narrowing. "Found strangled in his own drawing room, with a silk scarf no less. The police are in a muddle, and the neighbors are positively agog." Miss Marple's delicate hands paused over her knitting, her needles glinting in the afternoon light. "Strangled, you say?" Her voice was soft, but her pale blue eyes, deceptively mild, sharpened with interest. Lady Conway nodded, detailing the grim discovery. Sir Reginald, a man of 50, with a diplomat's polish, had been found at dawn by his guard, his face contorted, the scarf a gift from a Balkan envoy tightly about his throat. The local constabulary, under Inspector Crane, had descended with more zeal than finesse, naming for suspects Lady Eleanor Harrow, the diplomat's elegant but distant wife, Julian Trent, his fastidious secretary, Corporal Miles Baxter, his wartime comrade turned guard, and Percy Harrow, his spendthrift cousin. "Inspector Crane is a thorough man," Lady Conway remarked, "but he's all bluster. He thinks it's Lady Eleanor some nonsense about a lover's quarrel. I told him you'd see through the fog in a moment, Jane." Miss Marple smiled faintly, her thoughts already weaving through the sparse facts. Strangulation, she knew, was a peculiarly intimate crime, requiring nerve and proximity. The scarf intrigued her. Such a personal weapon suggested either calculation or impulse, but which? That evening, at Lady Conway's insistence, Miss Marple accompanied her to the Harrow residence. The house loomed under a sky bruised with dusk, its windows dark save for a flicker in the drawing room. Inspector Crane, a burly man with a mustache that seemed to bristle with indignation, greeted them curtly. "Lady Conway, this is no place for civilians," he began, but her imperious wave silenced him. "Miss Marple is my guest, Inspector, and her observations are worth more than your entire notebook." The drawing room, where Sir Reginald had met his end, was a testament to refined taste. A grand fireplace dominated one wall, its marble mantel adorned with porcelain figurines. Mahogany bookshelves housed leather-bound volumes, and a Persian rug softened the polished oak floor. Yet Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the details. A brass ashtray tipped over on a side table, its contents oddly absent. A faint scratch near the window barely visible against the wood, and the window itself, its latch aligned too perfectly, as if recently adjusted. The silk scarf, now in police custody, had left its mark in her Minda luxurious thing, embroidered with foreign motifs, and far too deliberate for a spontaneous act. Inspector Crane recounted the morning's events with a practiced air. Corporal Baxter found him at 6, stiff as a board. No signs of a struggle, save for that ashtray. Lady Eleanor was in her room, or so she claims. Trent, the secretary, says he worked late and left at 11. Baxter swears the house was secure, and that Cousin Percy was at the Red Lion, drinking away his debts. He shook his head. It's the wife, mark my words. They'd been at odds for months. Miss Marple, her shawl draped neatly over her shoulders, stepped closer to the window. She touched the latch, noting its smooth glide, and peered at the garden beyond, where shadows pooled under ancient yews. A most orderly room, she murmured, for such a disorderly death. Her eyes flicked to the scratch, a hairline blemish that whispered of something a ladder, perhaps, or a tool. Inspector Crane, missing her drift, pressed on about Lady Eleanor's motives, but Miss Marple's thoughts were elsewhere. People, she knew, were like her knitting. One loose thread could unravel the entire pattern as they left the house. Lady Conway linked arms with her friend. What do you make of it, Jane? Is Crane right about Eleanor? Miss Marple's lips curved in a gentle, enigmatic smile. Inspector Crane sees what is loudest, Beatrice, not what is truest. There is a pattern here, but it is not yet clear. A scarf, a scratch, an empty ashtray, these are stitches in a larger design. Her needles resumed their soft click as they walked, a quiet counterpoint to the secret stirring in her mind. Embassy Row, for all its grandeur, held a truth that would not stay buried long. Chapter 2. The scene of the crime, the morning after Miss Marple's initial visit to the Harrow residence. Upper Cranston awoke to a sky heavy with the promise of rain. Embassy Row, usually a parade of understated elegance, seemed subdued, as if the tragedy within Sir Reginald Harrow's home had cast a pall over its neighbors. Miss Jane Marple, seated at Lady Beatrice Conway's breakfast table, sipped her tea with a thoughtful air, her knitting folded neatly beside her. Lady Conway, ever eager for intrigue, pressed her friend for impressions of the previous evening's excursion. You were awfully quiet last night, Jane, she said, buttering her toast with vigor. What did you make of that dreadful drawing room? All that talk of Lady Eleanor Crane's got his heart set on her, hasn't he? Miss Marple's pale blue eyes, framed by the delicate lines of age, met her friend's with a gentle but guarded smile. Inspector Crane is a man of conviction, Beatrice, but convictions can blind as much as they reveal. The drawing room told its own story, and I suspect it is not the one he hears. She set down her cup, her mind retracing the details of the previous night. The overturned ashtray, the faint scratch on the oak floor, the too perfect latch of the window. These were not mere accidents of a violent moment. They were clues, deliberate in their subtlety, waiting for a patient mind to unravel them. Lady Conway, sensing an opportunity, leaned forward. Then you must go back, Jane. Crane will huff and puff, but I've invited myself to the Harrow house this morning to offer condolences, and you're coming with me. They can't refuse a lady's sympathy, can they? Miss Marple's lips twitched in amusement. Beatrice's boldness was as predictable as it was useful. Very well, she said softly, but we must tread lightly. Grief, like guilt, reveals itself in quiet moments. By 10 o'clock, the two women approached the Harrow residence, its red brick facade softened by climbing ivy but rendered somber by the drawn curtains. A young constable, stationed at the gate, recognized Lady Conway and allowed them entry with a deferential nod. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of beeswax polish and the weight of recent loss. The housekeeper, Mrs. Gibbs, a stout woman with red-rimmed eyes, ushered them into the hall, her hands twisting a handkerchief. Lady Eleanor's in the morning room, my lady, she said to Lady Conway, but she's not herself, poor soul. The inspector's in the drawing room, poking about again. Lady Conway swept toward the morning room, but Miss Marple lingered, her gaze settling on the grand staircase and the portraits lining the walls, stern-faced heroes of generations past, their eyes seeming to follow her. "Might I see the drawing room first, Mrs. Gibbs?" she asked, her voice mild but insistent. The housekeeper hesitated, then nodded, leading her down a corridor adorned with gilt-framed landscapes. Miss Marple noted the pristine condition of the runner beneath her feet. No muddy footprints, no signs of haste. The house, she thought, was a stage, carefully set for an audience it did not expect. The drawing room, when they reached it, was much as Miss Marple remembered. Though the morning light revealed details, the dusk had obscured. Inspector Crane stood near the fireplace, barking orders to a nervous young sergeant who was dusting for fingerprints. The room itself was a masterpiece of restrained opulence. The mahogany bookshelves gleamed, their volumes arranged with military precision. The Persian rug, a deep crimson, bore no stains or scuffs, and the marble mantel, crowned with delicate porcelain shepherdesses, reflected the flicker of a low fire. At the room's center, a chalk outline marked where Sir Reginald's body had lain, a stark reminder of the violence that had shattered this elegance. Crane turned, his mustache twitching at the sight of Miss Marple. "Miss Marple, is it? Lady Conway's friend." His tone was grudging, but he waved the sergeant away. "I suppose you've come to gawk like the rest. Well, there's little to see. Clean job. This murder's strangled with that scarf. No fuss, no blood. My money's on the wife. She's got the motive, and she was here all night." He gestured toward the chalk outline, his confidence bordering on bravado. Miss Marple inclined her head, her expression one of polite interest. "A clean job, you say, Inspector, yet murder is rarely so tidy." She stepped forward, her small frame moving with a purpose that belied her age. Her eyes swept the room, lingering on the overturned ashtray, a heavy brass affair that now sat upright on its table, its interior gleaming and empty. "No cigarette stubs," she murmured, almost to herself. Curious for a room where Sir Reginald was known to smoke. Crane frowned, clearly unused to such scrutiny. "What's that got to do with anything?" "The ashtray was knocked over in the struggle. That's all. Happens in a scuffle." Miss Marple did not reply, but her fingers brushed the table's edge, noting its polished surface, free of smudges or scratches. A struggle, she thought, would have left more traces: scattered papers, a displaced chair. Yet the room was orderly, almost staged. Save for that single anomaly, her attention shifted to the window, a tall sash affair framed by heavy damask curtains. The scratch on the oak floor, faint but unmistakable, ran parallel to the sill, a thin line no longer than a knitting needle. Miss Marple knelt, her shawl pooling about her, and examined it closely. The wood was freshly gouged, the edges sharp, suggesting recent damage. She glanced at the latch above, its brass gleaming as if newly oiled. "This window, Inspector," she said, rising with a slight creak of her joints. "Was it open when the body was found?" Crane's brow furrowed. "Closed and locked, according to Baxter. He checked the house at midnight. All secure. You're not suggesting someone climbed in, are you? The garden's walled, and there's no sign of a ladder." His tone was dismissive, but Miss Marple's mind was already turning over possibilities. A locked window could be opened and relocked, given the right tools and time. The scratch hinted at something: a tool, a weight, perhaps the edge of a shoe. She filed the thought away, her expression serene. Moving to the fireplace, she studied the mantel, her eyes catching on a small brass clock, its hands frozen at 11:30. "Was this stopped deliberately, Inspector?" she asked. Crane shook his head. "Just ran down, I expect. Old houses, old clocks." Miss Marple nodded, but her mind noted the clock's position, directly above the chalk outline. Had Sir Reginald fallen against it, or had someone paused it to mark a moment? The room, she sensed, was a puzzle, its pieces scattered but not lost. She crossed to the bookshelves, her fingers trailing lightly over the spines. Sir Reginald's tastes leaned toward history and diplomacy, with titles in French and German alongside English. One volume, a treatise on Balkan politics, protruded slightly, as if hastily replaced. Miss Marple eased it out, revealing a faint dust mark on the shelf, suggesting recent handling. Inside the cover, a faint pencil marked a series of numbers. The 7th of March 12 caught her eye. A code, a reference. She closed the book and returned it, her face betraying nothing. Crane, growing impatient, cleared his throat. If you're done sightseeing, Miss Marple, I've got work to do. The scarf's the key foreign, expensive, and found round his neck. Lady Eleanor's got access to his things, and they'd been rowing for weeks. Motive and opportunity, plain as day. He gestured toward the door, but Miss Marple lingered, her gaze settling on a small writing desk in the corner. Its surface held a blotter, a pen, and a stack of diplomatic stationery, but no letters, no notes. Did Sir Reginald work here often? She asked. Trent, the secretary, used it more, Crane replied. Said he was typing up cables till 11, then left. Night porter at his lodgings confirms it. Miss Marple nodded, but her eyes caught a faint smudge on the blotter, barely visible against the green leather. Ink, perhaps, or something else. She made a mental note to ask about Trent's habits, his access to the house, his demeanor under pressure. As they left the drawing room, Mrs. Gibbs reappeared, her face pale. Lady Eleanor will see you now, my lady, she said to Lady Conway, who had returned from the morning room. She's bearing up, but it's a strain. Miss Marple followed, but her thoughts remained in the drawing room. The scarf, she mused, was no ordinary weapon. Its origin Balkan, exotic suggested a connection to Sir Reginald's work, perhaps a diplomatic slight or a deeper intrigue. Strangulation required strength and resolve, but also proximity. Who among the suspects had both the nerve and the opportunity? In the morning room, Lady Eleanor sat by a window, her profile sharp against the gray light. She was a woman of 40, with auburn hair swept into a chignon and eyes that held a guarded calm. Her black dress, though simple, was impeccably tailored, and her hands, clasped in her lap, bore no tremor. Lady Conway offered condolences with her usual blend of warmth and curiosity, but Miss Marple watched Eleanor closely, noting the slight tightening of her jaw when Sir Reginald's name was mentioned. "Thank you for your kindness," Eleanor said, her voice low but steady. "It's a shock, of course. Reginald was a complex man." She offered no tears, no histrionics, and Miss Marple, accustomed to the varied masks of grief, found her restraint intriguing. Had Eleanor loved her husband, or had their marriage, as gossip suggested, been a hollow shell? The scarf, Miss Marple thought, might have been hers, but its use felt too deliberate, too theatrical. For a woman of such composure, as they spoke, Miss Marple's eyes wandered to a small table beside Eleanor, where a silver cigarette case lay open, its contents untouched. "Did Sir Reginald smoke in the drawing room often?" she asked, her tone conversational. Eleanor's gaze flickered. "He did, though I discouraged it." The smell clung to the curtains. Miss Marple nodded, her mind returning to the empty ashtray. If Sir Reginald had smoked that night, where were the stubs? Had someone cleared them, and why? The conversation turned to the suspects, with Lady Conway probing delicately about Trent, Baxter, and Percy. Eleanor's responses were measured. Trent was efficient, but reserved. Baxter fiercely loyal. Percy a charming nuisance. Yet Miss Marple sensed a reticence when Trent's name arose, a slight pause before Eleanor spoke. Was it distrust, or something more personal? The secretary, with his access to Sir Reginald's secrets, loomed larger in her thoughts as they prepared to leave. Miss Marple paused at the morning room's threshold, her shawl slipping slightly. "One last question, Lady Eleanor," she said, her voice gentle. The scarf was it one you recognized? Eleanor's eyes met hers, unblinking. It was a gift from a delegation last year. I never cared for it. Her tone was final, but Miss Marple noted the faintest flush at her throat. A lie, perhaps, or merely discomfort. The truth, she knew, lay in such fleeting moments. Outside, the first drops of rain pattered against Embassy Row's cobbles. Lady Conway, pulling her coat tight, chattered about Eleanor's coolness, but Miss Marple's mind was elsewhere. The drawing room had spoken, its clues whispering of calculation and concealment. The ashtray, the scratch, the books hidden, numbers, the stopped cloakage, was a thread in a tapestry of deceit. Someone had entered that room, wielded the scarf, and left no trace but these subtle marks. Trent, with his late-night typing. Baxter, with his soldier's strength. Percy, desperate for funds. Or Eleanor, hiding behind her icy calm. As they walked back to Lady Conway's villa, Miss Marple's needles resumed their soft click, a rhythm as steady as her thoughts. The scene of the crime was no mere stage. It was a mirror, reflecting the killer's mind, and Miss Marple, with her quiet persistence, was determined to see the face it revealed. Chapter 3. The grieving widow. The rain that had threatened Upper Cranston all morning broke in earnest by noon, drumming a soft tattoo against the windows of Lady Beatrice Conway's villa. Inside, Miss Jane Marple sat in a chintz-covered armchair, her knitting a delicate web of pale blue wool in her lap. The events of the morning, the drawing room's silent clues. Lady Eleanor's guarded composure lingered in her mind, like the aftertaste of bitter tea. Lady Conway, pacing before the fire, was less restrained. Eleanor Harrow's as cool as a cucumber. Jane, she declared, her hands slicing the air. Not a tear, not a quiver. If I didn't know better, I'd say she was glad Reginald's gone. Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily, her eyes fixed on the emerging pattern of her work. Grief, Beatrice, wears many faces, she said quietly. Some weep, some rage, some withdraw. Lady Eleanor's restraint may hide more than it reveals. Her thoughts turned to the silver cigarette case in the morning room, its pristine contents at odds with the empty ashtray in the drawing room. Small inconsistencies, she knew, were often the key to larger truths. Lady Conway, undeterred, pressed for action. You must speak to Eleanor properly, Jane. Not in that stuffy morning room with Mrs. Gibbs hovering. I've arranged for you to call on her this afternoon alone. She's expecting you at 3. Crane's off chasing his own tail, so you'll have her undivided attention. Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile. Beatrice's meddling, though brazen, was a gift. A private conversation with Lady Eleanor might uncover what polite condolences had not. At precisely 2:30, Miss Marple set out, her black umbrella shielding her from the drizzle. Embassy Row was hushed, its grand houses blurred by mist, and the Harrow residence loomed like a sentinel at its curve. Mrs. Gibbs answered the door, her face less harried, but still drawn. Lady Eleanor's in the conservatory, Miss Marple, she said, leading the way through a corridor lined with botanical prints. The conservatory, a glass-walled haven at the house's rear, was a riot of green. Ferns spilled from terracotta pots. Orchids bloomed in delicate whites, and a lemon tree cast dappled shadows. Lady Eleanor stood near a wicker table, pruning a rosebush with precise snips of her shears. She wore a charcoal dress, its severity softened by a single pearl brooch, and her auburn hair gleamed under the muted light. Miss Marple, she said, setting down the shears with a clink. Beatrice warned me you'd come. She says you have a knack for seeing things others miss. Her voice was smooth, but a faint edge betrayed her wariness. She gestured to a cushioned chair, and Miss Marple settled into it, her shawl draped neatly over her knees. A tray of tea awaited, the porcelain cups, delicate as eggshells, and Eleanor poured with a steady hand, though Miss Marple noted the slightest tremor as the spout met the cup. I'm no detective. Lady Eleanor, Miss Marple began, her tone gentle as a lullaby. "But I find that listening often reveals more than questioning. You've suffered a great loss, and yet you bear it with such grace." The compliment was sincere, but it was also a probe, and Eleanor's eyes flickered, as if weighing the words for hidden intent. "Grace is a habit, Miss Marple," she replied, sitting opposite. Reginald's work demanded it: dinners, receptions, endless smiles for foreign envoys. One learns to wear a mask. She sipped her tea, her gaze drifting to the rain-streaked glass. "His death is a shock, of course, but we were not close these past years. You've heard the gossip, I'm sure." Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of quiet sympathy. Upper Cranston's whispers painted Eleanor as a woman trapped in a loveless marriage, her husband's diplomatic duties leaving her to wander the town's lanes or sketch in the company of a local artist, Mr. Langley. "Gossip is a crude thing," Miss Marple said, "but it often carries a grain of truth. Was there discord between you and Sir Reginald?" Eleanor's lips tightened, and for a moment Miss Marple thought she might deflect, but then she leaned back, her hands folding in her lap. Reginald was consumed by his work cables, meetings, secrets he couldn't share. "We argued, yes, the night he died. He was distracted, irritable, muttering about a delicate matter. I pressed him, and he told me to leave his affairs alone. I went to my room at 10 and stayed there." Her voice was firm, but her fingers brushed the pearl brooch, a gesture Miss Marple noted as one of self-soothing. The mention of a delicate matter piqued Miss Marple's interest, but she let it lie, choosing instead to observe Eleanor's demeanor. The conservatory, with its humid air and faint scent of earth, felt like a confessional, yet Eleanor's words were measured, her story polished. Miss Marple's eyes wandered to the rosebush, its thorns sharp and freshly trimmed. "The scarf used in the crime," she said, almost casually. "Was it one you handled often? Such a distinctive piece." Eleanor's hand paused mid-sip, the cup hovering before her lips. "It was a gift from a Balkan delegation, as I told the inspector. Reginald kept it in his study, a trophy of sorts. I seldom touched it to garish, for my taste." Her tone was dismissive, but Miss Marple caught the fleeting glance toward the conservatory door, as if expecting an interruption. The scarf, she thought, was more than a trophy. It was a symbol, perhaps, of the very delicate matter that had troubled Sir Reginald. Shifting tack, Miss Marple sipped her tea, its warmth a contrast to the chill seeping through the glass. "You mentioned Sir Reginald's irritability. Was he often so, or was that night unusual?" Eleanor hesitated, then set her cup down with a faint clink. "He'd been on edge for weeks, ever since a new batch of cables arrived. He spent hours with Trent, locking the study door. I thought it was just diplomatic pressure, but—" She trailed off, her eyes narrowing. "There was a call that evening, just before our argument. He took it in the hall, and I heard him say, 'Not now, it's too dangerous.' Then he hung up and went to the drawing room." Miss Marple's needles, tucked in her bag, seemed to pulse with the rhythm of this new thread. A telephone call, a cryptic warning these were not the trappings of a domestic quarrel. "Did you recognize the voice on the line?" she asked. Eleanor shook her head. "It was muffled, and I was upstairs. I only caught his words." Her honesty felt genuine, but Miss Marple wondered what else Eleanor might have overheard, or chosen not to share. The conversation turned to the other suspects, prompted by Miss Marple's gentle probing. Of Julian Trent, Eleanor spoke with cool detachment. "He's efficient, almost too much so. Reginald relied on him, but I always found him watchful, as if he saw more than he said." Corporal Baxter, she described as a dogged shadow, loyal to a fault, though she admitted his presence sometimes grated. He'd follow Reginald's orders to the letter, even if it meant standing in the rain all night. Percy Harrow, the cousin, drew a faint smile. "A charming waste. He came begging for money that evening, as usual. Reginald sent him packing. Miss Marple listened, her mind sifting each word for weight. Eleanor's account aligned with Inspector Crane's timeline, yet the telephone call and Sir Reginald's agitation suggested a deeper current, one tied to his diplomatic world. The conservatory's warmth was stifling now, and Miss Marple adjusted her shawl, her eyes catching a small detail: a pair of gardening gloves on the wicker table, their fingers stained with green. "You find solace in your plants," she remarked, nodding toward the rosebush. "It must be a comfort in such times." Eleanor's face softened, a rare crack in her armor. "They demand nothing but care, unlike people." Reginald never understood that. For a moment, her guard was down, and Miss Marple glimpsed a woman weary of masks. But the moment passed, and Eleanor rose, signaling the end of their talk. "I've kept you long enough, Miss Marple. Thank you for listening." Her tone was polite but final, and Miss Marple stood, her small frame dwarfed by the towering ferns, as Mrs. Gibbs led her back through the house. Miss Marple's thoughts churned. Eleanor's story held no obvious contradictions, yet its very smoothness raised questions. The tremor in her hand, the glance at the door, the untouched cigarette case, these were not the marks of a murderer. But nor were they those of an innocent bystander. The scarf, the telephone call, the locked study, these pointed to a motive beyond marital strife, perhaps rooted in the shadowy world of diplomacy. Outside, the rain had eased to a fine mist, and Miss Marple opened her umbrella, her steps slow, along Embassy Row. Lady Eleanor was no weeping widow, but neither was she a cold-blooded killer. Her restraint, Miss Marple suspected, masked fear not of discovery, but of something, or someone, else. The drawing room's clues: the scratch, the ashtray. The stopped clock whispered of an intruder, but Eleanor's words hinted at a threat closer to home. As her needles resumed their soft click in her bag, Miss Marple felt the pattern of the crime beginning to emerge, its threads leading not to passion, but to secrets too dangerous to keep. Chapter 4. The dutiful secretary of the drizzle of the previous day had given way to a crisp afternoon in Upper Cranston. The sky, a pale wash of blue, streaked with wispy clouds. Miss Jane Marple, having returned to Lady Beatrice Conway's villa, after her visit with Lady Eleanor, sat by a window overlooking the garden, her knitting a soft cascade of wool in her lap. Her conversation with the diplomat's widow had left her with more questions than answers. The mysterious telephone call, Sir Reginald's agitation, the untouched cigarette case. These were pieces of a puzzle, but the shape of the whole remained elusive. Lady Conway, bustling in with a tray of scones, broke her reverie. "You've been awfully quiet since yesterday, Jane," she said, her eyes bright with curiosity. "What did Eleanor say? Is she guilty, or is Crane barking up the wrong tree?" Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze thoughtful. "Lady Eleanor is a woman under strain, Beatrice, but whether it's guilt or fear, I cannot yet say. There is more to this than a quarrel between husband and wife." She sipped her tea, her mind turning to the other suspects, particularly Julian Trent, the secretary whose name had surfaced with a hint of unease in Eleanor's voice. "I should like to speak with Mr. Trent," she said. "A secretary sees much and says little, but what he chooses to reveal may be telling." Lady Conway, ever eager to facilitate, clapped her hands. "Splendid. I've heard Trent's at the Harrow House this afternoon, sorting papers for the police. I'll telephone Mrs. Gibbs and insist you need a word on behalf of the village's concern, of course." Her tone was gleeful, and Miss Marple suppressed a smile. Beatrice's knack for bending propriety to her will was, as ever, a boon. By 2 o'clock, Miss Marple arrived at the Harrow residence, her black umbrella tucked under her arm despite the clear sky. The house seemed less foreboding in the daylight, its ivy catching the sun's gleam, but an air of disquiet lingered. Mrs. Gibbs, her face etched with fatigue, greeted her at the door. Mr. Trent's in the study, Miss Marple, she said, her voice low. He's been at it all morning, going through Sir Reginald's files. The inspector's off, questioning that cousin Percy, so it's quiet enough. She led Miss Marple through the hall, past the stern portraits, to a heavy oak door at the corridor's end. The study was a smaller, more austere room than the drawing room, its walls lined with shelves of diplomatic journals and maps. A broad desk dominated the center, its surface buried under stacks of papers, each labeled in a precise hand. Julian Trent stood behind it, a man of 30, with a slight frame, wire-rimmed spectacles, and a nervous tic that made his left eyelid flutter. His suit was immaculate, though Miss Marple noted a faint smudge of ink on his cuff, barely visible against the dark fabric. He looked up as she entered, his expression one of polite surprise. "Miss Marple, Mrs. Gibbs said you wished to see me. I'm afraid I'm rather busy. Sir Reginald's correspondence must be catalogued for the Foreign Office." Miss Marple settled into a leather chair across from the desk, her shawl draped neatly over her knees. "I shan't keep you long, Mr. Trent," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "I understand you were Sir Reginald's right hand, privy to his work and his habits. Such a position must carry great responsibility." Her tone was admiring, designed to put him at ease, and Trent's shoulders relaxed slightly, though his tic persisted. "It did," he said, adjusting his spectacles. "Sir Reginald was meticulous, and he expected the same of me. I handled his cables, typed his letters, arranged his schedule. He trusted me with sensitive matters." His voice was steady, but Miss Marple caught the slight hesitation, as if he weighed each word before releasing it. She leaned forward, her eyes kind but searching. "Sensitive matters," she repeated softly. "Lady Eleanor mentioned Sir Reginald was troubled in his final days, particularly after receiving new cables. Did you notice a change in him?" Trent's fingers, sorting a stack of papers, paused, and his tic flickered more rapidly. "He was under pressure," he said after a moment. "The Balkans, you know, always a diplomatic tightrope. He received a series of coded messages last week, and they kept him up late. I typed the replies, but he wouldn't discuss their contents, even with me." Miss Marple's needles, tucked in her bag, seemed to hum with this new thread. Coded messages. A diplomat's uneasiness pointed to a world beyond Upper Cranston's quiet lanes. "You worked late the night he died, I believe," she said, her tone conversational. "Inspector Crane mentioned you left at 11. A long day, surely." Trent nodded, his gaze dropping to the desk. "It was. Sir Reginald had me draft a memorandum, and I finished it in here. The night porter at my lodgings saw me come in just after 11. I didn't return until morning, when I heard the news." His alibi was tidy, but Miss Marple's eyes drifted to the typewriter on a side table, its keys worn but clean. She rose, her movements slow, and approached it, her fingers brushing the carriage. "A fine machine," she remarked. "You must type a great deal. I noticed the ribbon's missing, though. Have you replaced it recently?" Trent's head snapped up, his tic now a pronounced flutter. "The ribbon, oh, it ran dry last week. I've ordered a new one, but it hasn't arrived." His voice was too quick, and Miss Marple noted the faint flush creeping up his neck. She returned to her chair, her expression unchanged. "A secretary's work is so often invisible," she said, "yet you must see everything, the comings and goings, the moods of the household. Did anything strike you as unusual that night? A visitor, perhaps, or a sound?" Trent's fingers resumed their sorting, though they moved with less precision. "Nothing out of the ordinary," he said. "Sir Reginald was in the drawing room when I left. Lady Eleanor had gone upstairs, and Baxter was at his post. Percy Harrow came by earlier, making a nuisance of himself, but he was gone by 9. Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloguing his words. Percy's visit, Eleanor's retirement, Baxter's vigilance, these matched other accounts. but Trent's nervous demeanor suggested he knew more than he shared. Her eyes wandered to the desk, where a locked drawer caught her attention, its brass handle gleaming. "Sir Reginald kept his most private papers there, I presume?" she asked, nodding toward it. Trent's hand froze mid-motion, and for a moment, she thought he might deflect. "He did," he said at last, "but only he had the key. I've not opened it since it happened." The lie was subtle, but Miss Marple's keen senses caught it, the faint scratch around the lock, the slight misalignment of the drawer. Someone had tampered with it, and Trent's agitation marked him as the likely culprit. She did not press, however, choosing instead to shift the conversation. "You must have worked closely with Corporal Baxter," she said. "A loyal man, I hear." Trent's relief was palpable, his shoulders easing. "Baxter's a soldier through and through. He'd guard Sir Reginald with his life. A bit gruff, but reliable." "And Percy Harrow," she prompted. Trent's lips twitched, almost a sneer. "A leech. Always after money, always charming his way out of trouble." Sir Reginald tolerated him, but only just. The disdain was genuine, and Miss Marple filed it away, wondering if Percy's desperation had crossed paths with Trent's secrets. She rose, smoothing her shawl. "You've been most helpful, Mr. Trent. A secretary's loyalty is a rare thing, but it must be a burden, knowing so much and saying so little." Trent's tick flared, and he stood, offering a stiff nod. "It's my duty, Miss Marple. If you'll excuse me, I must finish this." She thanked him and left the study, her steps slow as Mrs. Gibbs escorted her out. The house was quiet, but the air felt charged, as if its walls held their breath. Outside, the sun cast long shadows across Embassy Row, and Miss Marple paused, her umbrella tapping the cobbles. Trent was a man of precision, yet his nerves betrayed him. The ink smudge, the missing ribbon, the tampered drawer, these were not the marks of an innocent bystander. Had he typed something that night? Something he now concealed? The coded cables, Sir Reginald's unease, the locked drawer, these pointed to espionage, a world where loyalty was a currency, easily spent. Trent's role as secretary gave him access, but also opportunity, and his agitation suggested a man caught in a web of his own making. As she walked back to Lady Conway's villa, Miss Marple's thoughts wove a pattern. The drawing room's clues, the scratch, the ashtray, the stopped clock hinted at an intruder, but Trent's secrets suggested a motive closer to Sir Reginald's work. Her needles, safe in her bag, seemed to click in rhythm with her deductions. Julian Trent was no mere functionary. He was a player in a dangerous game, and Miss Marple was determined to uncover his hand. Chapter 5. The steadfast guard. The afternoon sun had dipped low over Upper Cranston, casting a golden glow across Embassy Row that softened the somber air of the Harrow residence. Miss Jane Marple, having returned from her unsettling interview with Julian Trent, sat in Lady Beatrice Conway's drawing room, her knitting a delicate lattice of blue wool in her hands. The secretary's nervous tick, the tampered drawer, and the missing typewriter ribbon lingered in her mind, each a thread in the intricate tapestry of Sir Reginald Harrow's murder. Lady Conway, pouring tea with her usual vigor, was impatient for details. "Well, Jane, what of Trent? He's a slippery one, isn't he? All spectacles and fidgets, hardly the murdering type, but you never know." Miss Marple's eyes, sharp behind their mild facade, met her friend's with a thoughtful glint. "Mr. Trent is a man with secrets, Beatrice, and secrets make for unsteady ground, but we must not rush to judgment. There are others in this house whose stories need hearing." Her thoughts turned to Corporal Miles Baxter, the guard whose loyalty to Sir Reginald was said to be unshakable. His presence at the gate, his midnight rounds, and his discovery of the body placed him at the heart of the tragedy, yet his role remained opaque. "I should like to speak with Corporal Baxter," she said. A soldier's eye sees much, even if his tongue is slow to tell. Lady Conway, delighted by the prospect of further sleuthing, clapped her hands. I knew you'd not stop at Trent. Baxter's at the Harrow House, I hear, helping the police with their endless questions. I'll send a note to Mrs. Gibbs, insisting you need a word something about village condolences for Sir Reginald's service. They can't refuse that. Her eyes sparkled with mischief, and Miss Marple allowed herself a small smile. Be knack for opening doors was as invaluable as it was unabashed. By 4 o'clock, Miss Marple approached the Harrow residence once more, her black umbrella now folded, the air cool and fragrant with damp earth. The house stood as imposing as ever, its windows catching the fading light like watchful eyes. Mrs. Gibbs, her face a mask of weary resignation, met her at the door. Corporal Baxter's in the back garden, Miss Marple, she said, her voice hushed. He's been pacing like a caged bear since the inspector left. I'll fetch him to the library, if you like. Miss Marple nodded, her gaze lingering on the hall's polished floor, where a faint trace of mud marred the sheen a soldier's boot, perhaps, from Baxter's rounds. The library, a narrow room adjacent to the study, was lined with leather-bound volumes on military history and diplomacy, their spines faded but orderly. A single window overlooked the garden, where Miss Marple glimpsed a broad-shouldered figure moving among the yews. She settled into a high-backed chair, her shawl draped neatly, and waited. Moments later, Corporal Miles Baxter entered, his presence filling the room like a storm cloud. He was a man of 40, with a square jaw, cropped hair, and eyes that held a soldier's wariness. His uniform, though clean, bore the faint creases of long wear, and Miss Marple noted a bruise on his right knuckles, purpling against his tanned skin. His boots, polished to a gleam, carried a trace of garden soil, clinging to the soles. Miss Marple, he said, his voice gruff but polite. Mrs. Gibbs said you wanted a word. I'm not one for parlor talk, but I'll do my best. He stood, rather than sat, his posture rigid, as if ready to salute. Miss Marple's smile was warm, designed to ease his guard. Please, Corporal, sit. I'm no inspector, merely an old woman curious about Sir Reginald's final hours. You were his protector. I understand a heavy duty in such troubled times. Baxter hesitated, then lowered himself into a chair, his hands resting on his knees. I served with Sir Reginald in the war, he said. He was a captain then, saved my life at Ypres. When he asked me to guard his house, I didn't think twice. Been here 2 years, watching the gate, checking the grounds. His voice was steady, but his eyes flicked to the window, as if the garden held memories he'd rather not face. Miss Marple's needles, tucked in her bag, seemed to pulse with the weight of his words. Loyalty, she knew, could bind a man as tightly as guilt. You found him that morning, she said gently, in the drawing room. It must have been a shock. Baxter's jaw tightened, and the bruise on his knuckles seemed to darken as his hand clenched. Shock doesn't cover it, ma'am. He was gone, face purple, that scarf round his neck. I checked the house doors. Locked, windows shut, called the police straight away. His words were clipped, a soldier's report, but Miss Marple caught the tremor beneath them. The grief of a man who'd failed his charge. Her eyes softened, but her mind was sharp, sifting his account for cracks. You checked the house at midnight, I believe, and found all secure. Yet Sir Reginald was killed between 10 and midnight. Did you see or hear anything unusual during your rounds? Baxter's gaze met hers, steady but guarded. Nothing, ma'am. The house was quiet. Lady Eleanor's light was off. Trent left at 11, and that cousin, Percy, was long gone. I walked the perimeter gate walls, garden, all as it should be. His voice was firm, but Miss Marple noted the slight shift in his posture, a tightening of the shoulders. She leaned forward, her voice as soft as a whisper. The garden, Corporal, did you walk it often at night? The soil there is heavy, I notice, and your boots carry a trace of it." Baxter's eyes widened, and for a moment, she thought he might stand. "I tripped, in the dark, near the U.S., he said, his tone gruffer now. "Caught my foot on a root, scraped my hand." He held up his bruised knuckles, as if to prove the point, but Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the boots, their soles caked with earth that matched the garden's clay. The scratch on the drawing-room floor, she recalled, had whispered of a ladder or tool. Could it have been a boot, dragged in haste? "You're a careful man, Corporal," she said, her tone admiring. "Sir Reginald must have valued your vigilance. Did he seem troubled in his final days?" Lady Eleanor mentioned a delicate matter that weighed on him. Baxter's face hardened, and he shook his head. "He didn't confide in me, ma'am. I guarded the house, not his thoughts. But he was short with me that week, snapping orders, locking himself in the study with Trent. Something was eating him, that's sure." His honesty felt raw, and Miss Marple sensed no deception, only a soldier's frustration at being kept in the dark. She shifted tack, her eyes drifting to a photograph on the library table. Sir Reginald in uniform, Baxter at his side, both younger, both smiling. "You served together a long time," she said. "Such bonds are rare. Did anyone in the household test that loyalty? Mr. Trent, perhaps, or Percy Harrow?" Baxter's lips twitched, a flicker of disdain. "Trent's a pen-pusher, always hovering, always watching. Never trusted him, but Sir Reginald did. Percy's, a fool came begging that night, got sent off sharpish. Neither's got the spine to do what was done." His voice caught, and he looked away, the bruise on his hand stark against his clenched fist. Miss Marple nodded, her mind weaving his words into the pattern. Baxter's loyalty was genuine, but his soiled boots and bruised knuckles suggested a night less routine than he claimed. Had he seen something during his rounds, something he now withheld? The drawing-room's clues to scratch, the oiled latch pointed to an intruder, but Baxter's presence in the garden placed him perilously close to the crime. Yet his grief, raw and unfeigned, argued against guilt. A soldier, she thought, might kill for duty, but not for betrayal. She rose, smoothing her shawl. "You've been most kind, Corporal, sharing your burden with an old woman. Sir Reginald was fortunate to have you." Baxter stood, his posture easing slightly, though his eyes remained wary. "Just doing my job, ma'am. Wish I'd done it better." He escorted her to the door, his steps heavy, and Miss Marple felt the weight of his sorrow, a man bound by duty to a ghost. Outside, the evening air was sharp, the shadows of Embassy Row lengthening across the cobbles. Miss Marple paused, her umbrella tapping the ground as she considered Baxter's story. His loyalty was a shield, but it could also be a cage, trapping truths he dared not voice. The soil on his boots, the bruise on his hand, the scratch on the floor, these were not accusations, but questions, pointing to a moment in the garden that night. Had he confronted someone, or merely stumbled in the dark? The coated cables, the locked drawer, the scarf's exotic knot. These suggested a motive beyond personal grudge. One Baxter might have glimpsed, but not understood. As she walked back to Lady Conway's villa, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the other suspects. Trent's secrets, Eleanor's restraint, and now Baxter's burdened silent siege added a layer to the mystery. Her needles, safe in her bag, seemed to click in time with her deductions. Corporal Baxter was no murderer, she felt, but he was a man who knew more than he said, and that knowledge, like the soil on his boots, clung to him, waiting for a patient hand to brush it free. Chapter 6. The profligate cousin. The evening had settled over Upper Cranston with a gentle hush, the last rays of sunlight gilding the rooftops of Embassy Row. Miss Jane Marple, back at Lady Beatrice Conway's villa, sat by the fire, her knitting a soft cascade of wool in her lap. Her conversation with Corporal Baxter had left her with a sense of unease, his bruised knuckles and soiled boots hinting at a night less orderly than his account suggested. Yet his grief, raw and unpolished, spoke of a loyalty that seemed incompatible with murder. Lady Conway, sipping sherry and pacing with restless energy, was eager for the next step. "Baxter's a brick, Jane, but those boots. You think he's hiding something, don't you? What's next? That cousin, Percy Harrow, I wager. A rogue if ever I saw one." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her eyes thoughtful. "Corporal Baxter is a man of duty, Beatrice, but duty can obscure as much as it reveals. As for Mr. Percy Harrow, his reputation precedes him. A man in debt is often a man in desperation, and desperation makes for dangerous choices. Her mind turned to the snippets of gossip about Percy, his charm, his extravagance, his frequent pleas for Sir Reginald's aid. If he had visited the house that fatal night, as Baxter and Eleanor confirmed, his presence could not be dismissed. "I should like to meet Mr. Percy," she said. "His story may hold the key to what passed in that drawing room." Lady Conway's face lit with delight. "I knew you'd sniff him out. Percy's staying at the Red Lion, drowning his sorrows, no doubt. I'll send a note, inviting him to tea tomorrow, on pretext of condolence, of course. He's vain enough to accept, especially if there's a scone in it." Her laughter filled the room, and Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile. Beatrice's scheming, though theatrical, was a tool as precise as her own knitting needles. The following morning, the Red Lion Inn buzzed with the quiet hum of village life, its oak-beamed taproom fragrant with ale and wood smoke. Miss Marple arrived at 11, her black umbrella tucked under her arm, the air crisp with the scent of autumn leaves. Lady Conway had secured a private parlor, a cozy room with a low ceiling, and a table set for tea. Percy Harrow arrived promptly, his red face and boisterous laugh preceding him. He was a man of 45, broad-shouldered and slightly paunchy, with a florid complexion and hair that was thinning but meticulously combed. His suit, though well-cut, showed signs of wear at the cuffs, and Miss Marple noted the gleam of expensive cufflinks, their gold incongruous with his rumored penury. "Miss Marple, Lady Conway," he greeted, his voice booming as he bowed with exaggerated gallantry. "A pleasure, even in such grim times. Poor Reginald's shocking business, simply shocking." He settled into a chair, his bulk making it creak, and accepted a cup of tea with a flourish. Lady Conway, playing her part, murmured condolences, but Miss Marple watched Percy closely, her pale blue eyes missing nothing, the slight tremor in his hand as he stirred his tea, the quick glance toward the door, the forced joviality of his smile. "You were fond of your cousin, Mr. Harrow," Miss Marple began, her voice gentle as a breeze. "It must be a great loss, especially as you saw him so recently." Percy's laugh was a touch too loud, and he set his cup down with a clink. "Fond? Well, Reginald was family, you know, salt of the earth, but a bit stiff. Yes, I dropped by that evening, hoping for a chat. Got to the house about 8, left by 9. He was in one of his moods, so I didn't stay long." His tone was breezy, but Miss Marple noted the way his fingers toyed with the cufflinks, a nervous habit. She leaned forward, her shawl slipping slightly. "A mood, you say?" Lady Eleanor mentioned Sir Reginald was troubled that night. Did he speak of anything particular, his work, perhaps, or a visitor? Percy's eyes flickered, and for a moment she thought he might deflect. "Oh, you know Reginald always fretting over some diplomatic nonsense. He was in the drawing room, puffing on those infernal cigarettes, muttering about cables and deadlines. I asked for a small loan just to tide me over, mind, and he near bit my head off. Said he had bigger worries than my debts." He chuckled, but the sound was hollow, and Miss Marple's mind seized on the mention of cigarettes. So at odds with the empty ashtray. "You left at 9, she said, her tone conversational, "and went straight to the Red Lion, I presume." Percy nodded, his smile returning. "Straight to the bar, where I stayed till closing. The publican, old Harris, can vouch for me." drowned my sorrows in a pint or two, you might say. His joviality was back, but Miss Marple's eyes lingered on the cufflinks, their intricate design catching the light. "Those are fine pieces," she remarked, nodding toward them. "A family heirloom, perhaps." Percy's hand stilled, and he tugged his cuff down, covering the gold. "A gift, actually, from a friend in London. Not worth much, but they suit me." His voice was too quick, and Miss Marple filed away the lie, sensing a story behind the cufflinks that his debts could not explain. She sipped her tea, her mind turning to the drawing room's clues, the scratch on the floor, the oiled latch, the stopped clock. Percy's clumsy hands, she thought, seemed ill-suited to the scarf's precise knot, but his desperation made him a wild card. "Sir Reginald's household," she said, shifting tack, "must have been a busy one. Did you see much of Mr. Trent, or Corporal Baxter that evening?" Percy's lips curled in a faint sneer. Trent was skulking about, as usual always, with his nose in papers, acting like he ran the place. Baxter was at the gate, glaring at me like I was a thief. Neither's my sort, but Reginald swore by them. His disdain was palpable, and Miss Marple noted it, wondering if his resentment extended beyond words. A man scorned, she knew, could act rashly, even if his hands lacked finesse. She leaned back, her eyes soft, but searching. "You must have known Sir Reginald well, being family. Was he often so preoccupied, or was that night different?" Percy hesitated, his fingers drumming the table. "He was worse than usual, I'll say that. Kept glancing at the telephone, like he expected a call. When I left he was pacing, muttering about trust and betrayal. Thought it was just his way of brushing me off, but," he shrugged, his bravado faltering, "guess it was more serious than I knew." Miss Marple's needles, though silent in her bag, seemed to weave this new thread into the pattern. Betrayal, a word that echoed Lady Eleanor's account of the mysterious call, Trent's nervous tick, Baxter's guarded silence. Percy's story, though laced with bluster, held a kernel of truth, and his mention of the telephone sharpened her focus. "Did you hear the telephone ring while you were there?" she asked, her voice as mild as milk. Percy shook his head, his cufflinks glinting as he reached for a scone. "Not a peep. But Reginald was jumpy, like he was waiting for it. I didn't stick around to find out." His casualness felt forced, and Miss Marple wondered if he had lingered longer than he claimed, perhaps overhearing more than he admitted. The Red Lion's publican might confirm his alibi, but alibis, she knew, could be as malleable as clay. Lady Conway, sensing the conversation's end, chimed in with village pleasantries, but Miss Marple's mind was elsewhere. Percy Harrow was a man of appetites, his charm a thin veneer over desperation. The cufflinks, the bitter laugh, the too quick denials, these painted a picture of a man teetering on the edge, but not necessarily a killer. The scarf's not required skill, the window's entry stealth, neither of which suited Percy's bumbling demeanor. Yet his presence in the house, his grudge against Sir Reginald, could not be ignored. She rose, smoothing her shawl. "You've been most generous with your time, Mr. Harrow. It's a comfort to know Sir Reginald had family near, even in his final hours." Percy stood, his bow as florid as his arrival. "Anything for the village, Miss Marple, if you need me. I'm at the Red Lion, though. I hope to be back in London soon, once this mess is sorted." His smile was wide, but his eyes were wary, and Miss Marple felt the weight of his unspoken fears, as she and Lady Conway left the inn. The noon bell tolled from the church tower, its sound carrying over the cobbles. Miss Marple paused, her umbrella tapping the ground. Percy's story, like the others, was a patchwork of truth and evasion. His debts, his rejection, his lingering resentment, these were motives, but not proof. The drawing room's clues, the empty ashtray, the stopped clock, the Balkan scar pointed to a crime of calculation, not impulse. Yet Percy's mention of betrayal and the expected call aligned with the shadows of espionage haunting the case. Walking back to the villa, Miss Marple's thoughts churned. The suspect's Eleanor's restraint, Trent's secrets, Baxter's loyalty. Percy's desperation formed a circle around Sir Reginald's death, each casting a different shadow. Her needles, safe in her bag, seemed to click in rhythm with her deductions. Percy Harrow was no mastermind, but he was a loose thread, and pulling it might unravel the truth or lead her deeper into the maze. Chapter 7. The Village Whispers. The morning sun rose over Upper Cranston with a tentative warmth, its rays piercing the mist that clung to the lanes and rooftops. Miss Jane Marple, seated at Lady Beatrice Conway's breakfast table, stirred her tea with a thoughtful air, her knitting folded neatly beside her. Her encounter with Percy Harrow at the Red Lion had added another layer to the mystery of Sir Reginald Harrow's death, his boisterous charm and costly cufflinks hinting at a man whose troubles ran deeper than mere debt. Yet the precise knot of the Balkan scarf, the oiled window latch, and the empty ashtray in the drawing room suggested a crime of calculation, not the reckless act of a desperate cousin. Lady Conway, slicing her toast with vigor, was eager for the next move. Percy's a cad, Jane, but a murderer, I'm not so sure. What's your next step? You've spoken to them, Eleanor, Trent, Baxter, Percy. Where do you go from here? Miss Marple's pale blue eyes, sharp beneath their gentle facade, met her friends with a quiet resolve. The household tells one story, Beatrice, but the village tells another. Gossip, though crude, often holds fragments of truth, like pebbles in a stream. I think a walk through Upper Cranston might be illuminating. Her mind turned to the whispers she'd overheard in passing, tales of late-night visitors to the Harrow house, of Trent's solitary walks, of Sir Reginald's guarded manner. These were not evidence, but they were signposts, pointing to currents beneath the surface. Lady Conway clapped her hands, her enthusiasm undimmed. A splendid idea. You'll poke about the shops, the post office, the church. Oh, the vicar's wife is a dreadful snoop. She'll have plenty to say. I'll come along, of course, to smooth the way. Miss Marple's lips twitched in amusement. Beatrice's presence, though boisterous, would open doors that might otherwise remain shut. Very well, she said, but we must listen more than we speak. The village will talk, if we let it. By 10 o'clock, the two women set out, Miss Marple's black umbrella tucked under her arm, the air fresh with the scent of damp leaves and wood smoke. Upper Cranston's High Street was a charming affair, its shops and cottages huddled together like old friends. Their first stop was the greengrocer's, a cramped store, where baskets of apples and cabbages spilled onto the pavement. Mr. Hodges, the greengrocer, a wiry man with a weathered face, greeted them with a nod, his hands busy sorting potatoes. Lady Conway, with her usual flair, inquired after his family, steering the conversation toward the Harrow tragedy. A terrible thing, Mr. Hodges, she said. Sir Reginald strangled in his own home. Have you heard anything about the goings-on at Embassy Row? Hodges wiped his hands on his apron, his eyes glinting with the relish of a man privy to local lore. Oh aye, my lady, it's all anyone talks of. That secretary, Trent, he's a queer one. Seen him walking the lanes at all hours, head down, muttering to himself. Last week, I caught him near the church at midnight, looking like he'd seen a ghost. Not the sort you'd expect to strangle a man, mind, but he's got secrets, mark my words. Miss Marple's needles, safe in her bag, seemed to hum with this tidbit. Trent's late-night walks, so at odds with his meticulous demeanor, suggested a man wrestling with more than diplomatic memos. She stepped forward, her voice soft but probing. Midnight is late for a stroll, Mr. Hodges. Did you see where he went? The greengrocer shook his head, his brow furrowing. Lost him in the dark, ma'am. But he was headed toward the river, not back to his lodgings. Odd, if you ask me. Miss Marple nodded, her mind filing away the river's significance. A quiet path, secluded, perfect for a clandestine meeting. She thanked Hodges and moved on Lady Conway, trailing with a satisfied smirk. Their next stop was the post office, a squat building where Miss Pritchard, the postmistress, presided over a counter cluttered with stamps and parcels. A spinster of 60, with a pinched face and a memory for detail. She was known for her knack of gleaning news from every letter that passed through her hands. Lady Conway, feigning interest in a package, broached the subject of Sir Reginald. "Such a loss for the village, Miss Pritchard," she said. "You must see all sorts coming and going from the Harrow house. Anything catch your eye lately?" Miss Pritchard's eyes gleamed behind her spectacles, and she leaned forward, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "Plenty, my lady. Sir Reginald was getting telegrams nigh on daily last month, some in code foreign gibberish, I reckon. I'd hand them to Trent myself, and he'd whisk them away like they were gold. Last one came the day before he died, marked urgent. Trent looked proper, rattled when he took it." Miss Marple's interest sharpened, the coded telegrams aligning with Eleanor's mention of Sir Reginald's unease and Trent's nervous tick. "Did you see the sender, Miss Pritchard?" she asked, her tone mild. The postmistress shook her head, her lips pursing. "No name, just a diplomatic seal balkan, I think, from the stamp. But I'll tell you this. Trent sent a wire of his own that same day, to London, and he paid extra to keep it quiet." Miss Marple's mind raced, the image of Trent's ink-smudged cuff and missing typewriter ribbon taking on new weight. A secret telegram, a coded message. These were the tools of espionage, not mere clerical work. She thanked Miss Pritchard, her expression serene, but her thoughts churned with possibilities. As they left the post office, Lady Conway could barely contain herself. "Coded telegrams, Jane? Trent's up to his neck in something, isn't he?" Miss Marple nodded, her umbrella tapping the cobbles. "Mr. Trent is a man of layers, Beatrice, and not all of them are innocent. But we must hear more before we judge." Their next destination was the Red Lion Inn, where the publican, Mr. Harris, a jovial man with a barreled chest, was polishing glasses behind the bar. Lady Conway, with her knack for disarming, ordered a lemonade and steered the talk to Percy Harrow. "Poor Mr. Percy," she said. "He must be heartbroken over his cousin. I hear he was here the night Sir Reginald died." Harris chuckled, his cloth pausing mid-swipe. "Heartbroken. Percy was 3 sheets to the wind, my lady, laughing and boasting as usual. Came in around 9, stayed till we closed at 11. Kept saying he'd come into money soon, though I've heard that tune before. Bought rounds for half the bar, which isn't like him. He's usually cadging drinks, not giving him." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. Percy's expensive cufflinks and sudden generosity, painting a picture at odds with his penury. "Did he mention how he'd come by this money?" she asked, her voice as gentle as a breeze. Harris shook his head, his grin fading. "Not a word, ma'am, but he was cagey when I asked. Kept checking his watch, like he was expecting someone. Nobody showed, far as I saw." Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning to Percy's bitter exit from the Harrow house, his claim of drowning his sorrows. A man expecting wealth, flaunting gold cufflinks, was not merely a wait. He was a man with prospects, or promises, that bore scrutiny. Their final stop was the churchyard, where Mrs. Ellison, the vicar's wife, was tending the roses near the lich gate. A woman of 40 with a sharp nose and a sharper tongue, she was. The village's unofficial chronicler, her observations as precise as her pruning shears. Lady Conway, with a nod to propriety, admired the blooms before mentioning the Harrow case. "Such a tragedy, Mrs. Ellison," she said. "The village must be abuzz. Have you heard anything of note?" Mrs. Ellison's shears snipped a wilted bud, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of gossip. "More than you'd think, my lady. The Harrow house has had its share of odd visitors lately. Just 2 nights before the murder, I saw a figure in the garden slate, cloaked, moving quick near the eaves. Too small for Baxter or Percy, and Trent's too lanky. I thought it was a poacher, but now, she trailed off, her shears pausing. Miss Marple's heart quickened. The image of the cloaked figure aligning with Baxter's soiled boots and the drawing room's scratched floor. "Did you see where they went?" she asked, her tone conversational. "Toward the house, ma'am, then gone in the dark? I told the vicar, but he said not to stir trouble. Still, it's queer, with Sir Reginald's work and all." Mrs. Ellison's voice dropped, her eyes darting to the church. "They say he was mixed up in foreign plots, you know, spies and such." Miss Marple nodded, her mind weaving this new thread into the pattern. A cloaked figure, a diplomatic seal, a coded telegrams. These were not the trappings of a domestic crime, but of something far darker. As they left the churchyard, Lady Conway linked arms with Miss Marple, her voice low with excitement. "A cloaked figure, Jane, spies. This is better than a novel. What do you make of it?" Miss Marple's umbrella tapped the path, her thoughts racing. The village sees what the house conceals. Beatrice, Trent's walks, Percy's boasts, a stranger in the garden. These are shadows of a larger truth. Sir Reginald's death was no impulse. It was a move in a game we do not yet understand. Walking back to the villa, Miss Marple's mind sifted the day's harvest. The greengrocer's tale of Trent's midnight wanderings, the postmistress's coded telegrams, the publican's account of Percy's sudden largesse, the vicar's wife's cloaked figure. Each was a clue, pointing to a motive rooted in Sir Reginald's diplomatic world. The scarf's Balkan origin, the stopped clock, the oiled latch. These whispered of espionage, of betrayal, of a killer who moved with purpose. Her needles, silent in her bag, seemed to click in rhythm with her deductions. The village had spoken, and its whispers, like the wind, carried truths that would not stay buried. Chapter 8. The missing cipher. The afternoon light filtered through the lace curtains of Lady Beatrice Conway's villa, casting delicate patterns across the parlor where Miss Jane Marple sat, her knitting a soft heap of wool in her lap. The village's whispers, gathered during her morning perambulations, had added weight to the mystery of Sir Reginald Harrow's death, Trent's midnight walks, Percy's boasts of coming wealth, the cloaked figure in the garden, and the coded telegrams. All pointed to a crime steeped in intrigue. Yet the drawing room's clues, the scratched floor, the empty ashtray, the Balkan scarf remained the heart of the puzzle, their meaning just out of reach. Lady Conway, pouring tea with her customary zeal, was alight with anticipation. "You've stirred up a hornet's nest, Jane. Spies, telegrams, shadowy figures. What now? Are you off to grill Trent again? Or perhaps that cloaked stranger's hiding in the churchyard?" Miss Marple's pale blue eyes, sharp beneath their gentle veneer, met her friend's with a quiet resolve. "The village has given us much, Beatrice, but the house holds the truth. The study, where Sir Reginald kept his secrets, may yield what gossip cannot. I should like to see it again, with your help." Her mind turned to the locked drawer in Trent's desk, its faint scratches suggesting a breach, and the coded telegrams Miss Pritchard had described. A diplomat's papers, she knew, were a map of his mind, and Sir Reginald's might reveal the delicate matter that had cost him his life. Lady Conway's face lit with mischief. "The study, of course. Jane, you're after that drawer." Trent was so twitchy about. "I'll telephone Mrs. Gibbs and insist we visit to offer further condolences, and you'll just happen to need a moment in the study." Crane's too busy chasing Percy to notice. Her laughter rang out, and Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile. Beatrice's audacity, though flamboyant, was a key to doors otherwise barred. By 2 o'clock, the two women arrived at the Harrow residence, the sky above Embassy Row, a pale expanse, unbroken by clouds. The house, its red brick facade softened by ivy, seemed to watch their approach, its windows dark and unyielding. Mrs. Gibbs, her face etched with the strain of recent days, greeted them at the door. "Lady Eleanor's resting, my lady," she said to Lady Conway, "but I'll take you to the morning room. Mr. Trent's in the study, sorting more papers for the police." Miss Marple, her black umbrella tucked under her arm, requested a brief look at the study first. "Just to pay my respects to Sir Reginald's work," she said, her voice soft but firm. Mrs. Gibbs hesitated, then nodded, leading them down the corridor. The study was, as Miss Marple remembered, an austere room of shelves and maps, its air heavy with the scent of leather and ink. Julian Trent was absent, a relief that quickened her pulse, though a stack of freshly sorted papers on the desk suggested he'd been there moments before. Lady Conway, with a theatrical sigh, declared she'd check on Eleanor, leaving Miss Marple alone. "Don't be long, Jane," she whispered, her eyes twinkling. "I'll keep Mrs. Gibbs busy." The door clicked shut, and Miss Marple's small frame moved with purpose, her shawl slipping slightly as she approached the desk. The locked drawer, its brass handle gleaming, drew her eye at once. The scratches around the lock were more pronounced in the daylight, a telltale sign of forced entry. She tested the handle, finding it unyielding, but her fingers traced the desk's edge, searching for a hidden catch. Finding none, she turned to the blotter, its green leather faintly smudged with ink trends, doing perhaps, or another's. A letter opener, its blade sharp and silver, lay nearby, and Miss Marple's mind flashed to the possibility that it had pried the drawer open. She hesitated, propriety warring with necessity, then set the thought aside. The police, she trusted, would examine the drawer in time, but her task was to observe, not to tamper. Her gaze swept the room, settling on a small bookshelf beside the window. Among the diplomatic tomes, a slim volume on cryptography caught her attention, its spine slightly askew. She eased it out, noting a faint dust mark where it had been moved. Inside, a folded paper slipped free, its edges worn, but intact. Unfolding it with care, Miss Marple found a handwritten note, "Eagle Falls. At dawn. Trust no one." The script was precise, not Sir Reginald's florid hand, but another's Trent's, perhaps, or a stranger's. Her heart quickened. The cryptic phrase echoing wartime ciphers she'd once heard discussed by a nephew in military intelligence. This was no mere memorandum. It was a warning, a signal, a piece of the espionage web she'd begun to suspect. She replaced the note and book, her mind racing. The cipher's presence in the study, hidden but not destroyed, suggested haste or oversight. Had Sir Reginald found it, confronting its author? Had it driven him to the drawing room, where the scarf awaited? She moved to the typewriter, its missing ribbon, still a nagging detail. The machine's carriage was clean, but a faint smudge on the keys matched the ink on Trent's cuff, tying him to late-night work that might not have been innocent. The room, she sensed, was a vault of secrets, and the cipher was its keystone. The door opened, and Trent entered, his spectacles glinting in the light. His tick flared as he saw Miss Marple, his hand pausing on the doorknob. "Miss Marple, I wasn't told you'd be here." His voice was polite but strained, and she noted the way his eyes flicked to the desk, then away. "I was admiring Sir Reginald's collection," she said, gesturing to the shelves, her tone as mild as milk. "Such a scholarly man. You must have learned much, working so closely with him." Trent's shoulders eased, though his tic persisted. "He was a brilliant man, ma'am, but demanding. I did my best to keep up." He moved to the desk, his fingers brushing the blotter as if to reassure himself. Miss Marple, seizing the moment, mentioned the cipher casually. "I recall Sir Reginald once spoke of codes at a dinner Lady Conway hosted. Did he ever share such interests with you?" Trent's face paled, his tic now a rapid flutter. "Codes? No, ma'am, that was above my pay grade. He kept those matters to himself." His denial was too quick, and Miss Marple's mind marked it. the cipher's shadow looming larger. She shifted tack, her voice gentle. You worked late the night he died, I believe. Did you notice anything Amos papers out of place? Perhaps, or a visitor? Trent's hand tightened on a pen, his knuckles whitening. Nothing, ma'am. I typed a memorandum, locked the study, and left at 11. The house was quiet. His words were rehearsed, but his eyes betrayed him, darting to the locked drawer. Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene, but her thoughts churned. The drawer, the cipher, the ink smudge, these tied Trent to a secret he guarded fiercely. Lady Conway's voice echoed from the hall, signaling her return, and Miss Marple took her leave, thanking Trent with a smile. You've been most kind, Mr. Trent. A secretary's work is never done, I see. He nodded stiffly, his tick betraying his relief at her departure. As Mrs. Gibbs escorted her out, Miss Marple's mind wove the new clues into the pattern. The cipher Eagle Falls at dawn was a clarion call of betrayal. Its presence in the study, a link to Sir Reginald's final hours. Trent's agitation, his tampered drawer, his missing ribbon. These were not the marks of a mere functionary, but of a man entangled in a deadly game. Outside, Embassy Row was bathed in the soft glow of late afternoon, its cobbles slick from an earlier shower. Miss Marple paused, her umbrella tapping the ground as she considered the cipher's implications. Espionage, she knew, was a world of shadows, where trust was a luxury few could afford. The scarf's Balkan origin, the coded telegrams, the cloaked figure in the garden, these pointed to a foreign hand, but Trent's role suggested a traitor within. Had Sir Reginald uncovered the cipher, confronting Trent? Had the drawing room become a stage for silencing a discovery? Walking back to the villa, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the other suspects. Eleanor's guarded fear, Baxter's burdened loyalty, Percy's desperate bravado each played a part, but Trent's secrets were the darkest. The drawing room's clues, the scratched floor, the stopped clock, the empty ashtray whispered of an intruder, but the study's cipher screamed of motive. Her needles, silent in her bag, seemed to click in rhythm with her deductions. The missing cipher was no longer missing, but its meaning was a lock yet to be opened, and Miss Marple was determined to find the key. Chapter 9. The night in question. The evening sky over Upper Cranston was a deep indigo, pricked with the first stars, as Miss Jane Marple sat in Lady Beatrice Conway's parlor, her knitting a soft tangle of wool in her lap. The discovery of the cipher Eagle Falls at dawn, in Sir Reginald Harrow's study, had sharpened the contours of the mystery. Its cryptic warning tying the Balkan scarf, the coded telegrams, and Julian Trent's nervous demeanor to a web of espionage. Yet the drawing room, with its scratched floor, empty ashtray, and stopped clock, remained the silent witness to the crime, its clues demanding a closer look. Lady Conway, sipping her after-dinner sherry, was brimming with questions. That cipher, Jane, its positively thrilling spies, betrayal, all in our little village. But how does it fit with the scarf and that wretched ashtray? Are you off to corner Trent again, or is Baxter hiding more than his muddy boots? Miss Marple's pale blue eyes, keen beneath their gentle facade, met her friend's with a measured calm. The cipher is a piece of the truth, Beatrice, but the drawing room holds the moment of it. We must revisit the night Sir Reginald died, tracing each step, each sound, to see where the pattern phrase. Her mind turned to the timeline. Eleanor's retirement at 10, Trent's departure at 11, Baxter's midnight rounds, Percy's exit at 9. The coroner's report, placing the death between 10 and midnight, narrowed the window. But the room's anomalies, the oiled latch, the faint scratch suggested a breach that no one had admitted. I should like to see Inspector Crane, she said. His facts, though blunt, may clarify what the suspects obscure. Lady Conway's face lit with delight. Crane, he'll huff and puff, but he can't resist your charm. Jane, I'll telephone the station and insist you have a word on behalf of the village's peace of mind, naturally. Her laughter echoed, and Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile. Beatrice's knack for bending authority was as sharp as her own observations. And the inspector, for all his bluster, might let slip a detail to bridge the gaps. By 9 the next morning, Miss Marple arrived at Upper Cranston's police station, a squat brick building where Constable Red, a lanky youth, ushered her into Inspector Crane's office. The room was cluttered with files and maps, the air thick with cigarette smoke and the tang of ink. Crane, his mustache bristling, rose with a grudging nod. "Miss Marple, I presume. Lady Conway's been bending my ear about your insights. I've got a murder to solve, so make it quick." His tone was curt, but Miss Marple settled into a chair, her shawl draped neatly, her umbrella resting against her knee. "I shan't trouble you long, Inspector," she said, her voice soft but steady. "You've been most thorough, I'm sure, but I find the night of Sir Reginald's death raises questions. The coroner's report, for instance, might you share its findings?" Crane's brow furrowed, but he reached for a file, his pride in his work outweighing his impatience. "Death by strangulation, between 10 and midnight," he said, flipping pages. "No defensive wounds, no signs of a struggle beyond that tipped ashtray. The scarf was tight, knotted with precision, took strength, but not brute force. He was likely taken by surprise." Miss Marple nodded, her mind seizing on the absence of struggle, so at odds with a violent death. "And the drawing room itself?" she asked. "You found no other disturbances, no footprints, no marks beyond the ashtray and that small scratch near the window?" Crane's eyes narrowed, as if sensing a trap, but he shook his head. "Nothing. The rug was clean, the furniture untouched. That scratch is barely a nick, could be old, though Baxter swears it wasn't there before. The window was locked, latch secure. No way anyone got in from outside, not with Baxter patrolling." Her needles, silent in her bag, seemed to click with this confirmation. The locked window, the oiled latch, the scratch, these whispered of an entry but one, so subtle it had evaded Crane's notice. "You questioned the household's movements," she said, her tone conversational. "Lady Eleanor, for instance, her maid confirmed her whereabouts." Crane leaned back, his chair creaking. "Aye, the maid, Clara, says her mistress went to bed at 10, light off by 1:30. No one saw her leave her room till morning. Trent left at 11, verified by the night porter. Baxter's log shows rounds at 10, 11, and mid, secure each time. Percy was at the Red Lion by 9, drunk as a lord, till closing." Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her mind was a steel trap, sifting his words. The timeline was tight, yet the room's clues suggested a gap, a moment when someone had slipped through the cracks. "And Sir Reginald himself?" she asked. "Was he seen after Percy's visit at 9? Crane hesitated, then nodded. "Baxter saw him in the drawing room at 10, smoking and pacing. Said he looked troubled, told him to double-check the gate. That's the last anyone saw him alive." The mention of smoking caught her attention, the empty ashtray looming in her mind. He was smoking, you say, yet the ashtray was empty, save for its being overturned. Crane's mustache twitched, his confidence faltering. "Well, yes. Odd that. He was a chain smoker, always at it. Maybe he cleared it himself, or the killer did." Miss Marple's expression remained serene, but her thoughts raced. A killer who paused to tidy an ashtray was no ordinary murderer. It was a calculated act, erasing traces of their presence. She shifted tack, her voice gentle. "The scarf, Inspector, have you traced its use in the household?" "Lady Eleanor said it was kept in the study, but was it seen elsewhere?" Crane's eyes lit with a flicker of pride. "We checked. It was a gift from a Balkan envoy, usually on display in the study. Baxter saw it there that afternoon, but no one recalls it being moved. The killer must have taken it that night planned, if you ask me." Miss Marple nodded, the scarf's journey from study to drawing room, another thread in the pattern. It's precise, not requiring skill, ruled out a hasty act. But its origin tied it to the cipher and the coded telegrams. Her gaze drifted to a map on Crane's wall, its pins marking diplomatic posts across Europe. Sir Reginald's work, she said, almost to herself, must have brought many pressures. Did you find anything among his papers, letters, cables, that might explain his unease? Crane's face darkened, and he closed the file with a snap. That's Foreign Office business, Miss Marple. We found routine correspondence, nothing more. Trent's sorting the rest, and they'll seal it up tight. My job's to catch a killer, not chase spies. Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile, his defensiveness revealing more than he intended. The cipher, she suspected, was no routine matter, and Trent's role in sorting the papers placed him at the heart of its concealment. She rose, smoothing her shawl. You've been most generous, Inspector. A clear timeline is a great comfort to an old woman's curiosity. Crane grunted, mollified but wary, and escorted her out, his mustache still bristling. Outside, the morning air was crisp. Embassy Row's grandeur softened by a light fog. Miss Marple paused, her umbrella tapping the cobbles as she retraced the night in question. Between 10 and midnight, Sir Reginald had been alone in the drawing room, smoking, pacing, troubled by a delicate matter. Eleanor was in her room. Trent had left. Baxter patrolled. Percy yet the window's oiled latch, the scratched floor, and the missing cigarette stubs suggested an intruder, one who entered silently, struck with precision, and left no trace but a carefully curated scene. Her thoughts turned to the studies. Cipher Eagle Falls at dawn, and Trent's agitation when questioned. Had Sir Reginald discovered it, confronting his secretary? Had the telephone call Eleanor overheard, with its warning of danger, prompted his pacing? The scarf, taken from the study, implied access to the house, but the window's clues pointed to an outsider or someone staging the appearance of one. Baxter's soiled boots, Percy's boasts, Eleanor's restraint each could fit. But Trent's secrets loomed largest, his ink-smudged cuff and missing ribbon tying him to the cipher's shadow. As she walked back to Lady Conway's villa, Miss Marple's mind wove the timeline into the pattern. The night in question was a tapestry of alibis and anomalies, its threads converging on the drawing room. The stopped clock, frozen at 11:30, was no accident. She felt it marked the moment of death, or a deliberate misdirection. Her needles, silent in her bag, seemed to click in rhythm with her deductions. The truth was near, hidden in the gap between 10 and midnight, and Miss Marple was determined to find the hand that had pulled the scarf tight. Chapter 10. The Confrontation. The morning mist had burned away over Upper Cranston, leaving Embassy Row bathed in a crisp autumn light that belied the tension simmering within the Harrow residence. Miss Jane Marple, seated at Lady Beatrice Conway's breakfast table, sipped her tea with a thoughtful air, her knitting folded neatly beside her. The timeline of Sir Reginald Harrow's final hours, clarified by Inspector Crane's grudging disclosures, had narrowed the window of his death to between 10 and midnight, a period marked by the drawing room's enigmatic clues, the scratched floor, the oiled window latch, the empty ashtray, and the stopped clock. The cipher Eagle Falls at dawn, found in the study, coupled with Julian Trent's nervous evasions and the Balkan scarf's precise knot, pointed to a crime rooted in espionage, not passion. Lady Conway, buttering her toast with gusto, was eager for action. You've got them all pinned. Jane Eleanor's icy calm, Trent's twitches, Baxter's boots, Percy's bluster. What's next? Are you storming the house to unmask the killer? Miss Marple's pale blue eyes, sharp beneath their gentle veneer, met her friend's with a quiet resolve. The pieces are nearly in place, Beatrice. But the truth requires a final step, a gathering of those who shared Sir Reginald's last night. In their presence, the pattern will reveal itself. Her mind turned to the drawing room, the stage of the crime, where the suspects' alibis and evasions could be tested against the room's silent testimony. "I should like to speak with them all together, in the drawing room," she said. "Your influence, Beatrice, might persuade Inspector Crane to allow it." Lady Conway's face lit with delight, her enthusiasm as boundless as ever. "A showdown. Oh, Jane, you're a marvel. I'll ring Crane and insist it's a matter of village harmony closure for Sir Reginald's memory. That sort of thing. He'll grumble, but he'll cave." Her laughter rang out, and Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile. Beatrice's knack for bending authority was a tool as precise as her own deductions, and the prospect of facing the suspects en masse quickened her pulse. By 3 o'clock, the Harrow residence loomed under a sky of pale gold, its red brick facade as imposing as ever. Inspector Crane, his mustache bristling with skepticism, had reluctantly agreed to the gathering, swayed by Lady Conway's blend of flattery and insistence. The drawing room, its grandeur undimmed by tragedy, was prepared. The Persian rug gleamed, the mahogany bookshelves stood sentinel, and the marble mantel's porcelain figurines caught the light. The chalk outline of Sir Reginald's body was gone, but the room's air held a lingering chill, as if the crime still echoed in its corners. Miss Marple stood near the fireplace, her small frame dwarfed by the room's opulence, her shawl draped neatly over her shoulders. Her black umbrella rested against a chair, a quiet sentinel of her presence. The suspects filed in, their faces a study in unease. Lady Eleanor Harrow, her auburn hair swept into a chignon, wore a black dress that accentuated her pale composure, though her fingers brushed her pearl brooch in a gesture of restraint. Julian Trent, his spectacles glinting, hovered near the window, his nervous tic more pronounced, his ink-smudged cuff barely concealed by a tugged sleeve. Corporal Miles Baxter, broad-shouldered and taciturn, stood by the door, his polished boots free of soil but his bruised knuckles still visible, a silent testament to his midnight patrol. Percy Harrow, red-faced and boisterous, lounged in an armchair, his gold cufflinks catching the light, his forced joviality a thin mask over wariness. Inspector Crane, arms crossed, leaned against the bookshelves, his eyes darting between Miss Marple and the suspects, half expecting a spectacle. Lady Conway, seated near Miss Marple, offered a nod of encouragement, but Miss Marple's voice, when she spoke, was gentle yet commanding, cutting through the room's tension like a needle through silk. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her eyes sweeping the group. "Sir Reginald's death has cast a shadow over this house, and it is time to bring light to the truth. I am no detective, merely an old woman who sees patterns where others see chaos. This room, where he died, holds the story of that night, and you, each of you, are part of it." She stepped toward the window, her fingers brushing the sill where the faint scratch marred the oak floor. "Let us begin with the night in question," she said. "Between 10 and midnight, Sir Reginald was strangled here, with a silk scarf from a Balkan envoy. It's not tied with precision. The coroner found no struggle, only an overturned ashtray and this small scratch. The window was locked, the latch oiled, suggesting an entry or the appearance of one." Her gaze settled on Baxter, whose jaw tightened. "Corporal Baxter, you patrolled the grounds, finding all secure. Yet your boots carried garden soil, and your knuckles bore a bruise. Did you encounter someone that night?" Baxter's eyes met hers, steady but pained. "I tripped, ma'am, near the EUs. Scraped my hand, got dirt on my boots. I saw nothing, heard nothing. The house was locked tight." His voice was firm, but Miss Marple noted the clench of his fist, the grief beneath his stoicism. She nodded, turning to Percy. "Mr. Harrow, you left at 9, after a quarrel with your cousin? You spoke of his muttering about betrayal, and at the Red Lion, you boasted of coming wealth. Yet your debts are heavy, and your cufflinks costly. Did you return, hoping for more than a loan?" Percy's laugh was loud, but his eyes darted to the door. Return. Nonsense, Miss Marple. I was at the pub till closing, as Harris will tell you. Reginald was tight-fisted, but I didn't kill him for it. Those cufflinks, a trifle, a gift. His bravado faltered, and Miss Marple's mind marked his evasion, the cufflinks a clue to a promise unfulfilled. She moved to Eleanor, her tone softening. Lady Eleanor, you retired at 10, your maid confirming your light was out. Yet you heard a telephone call, Sir Reginald, speaking of danger. Did you know of his fears, or the delicate matter that troubled him? Eleanor's fingers stilled on her brooch, her gaze unyielding. I told you, Miss Marple, I stayed in my room. The call was muffled, his words all I caught. Reginald kept his work from me. Her voice was steady, but Miss Marple saw the faint flush at her throat, a sign of strain, not guilt. Finally, she turned to Trent, whose tic flared under her scrutiny. Mr. Trent, you left at 11, your alibi firm. Yet your cuff bears ink, your typewriter lacks a ribbon, and a cipher, Eagle Falls, at dawn, was found in the study. Sir Reginald was troubled by coded cables you handled. What did you know of his discoveries? Trent's face paled, his spectacles slipping, as his tic became a spasm. I typed his memos, nothing more. The cipher I never saw. Sir Reginald kept such things locked away. His voice cracked, and Crane's eyes narrowed, sensing weakness. Miss Marple stepped closer, her voice low, but piercing. This room tells a different story, Mr. Trent. The ashtray, empty, despite Sir Reginald's smoking. The clock stopped at 11:30. The scarf, taken from the study you knew well. These are not accidents, but choices, made by a hand that planned betrayal. She turned to the group, her small frame commanding the room. Sir Reginald uncovered a traitor, a foreign agent planting false ciphers to destabilize alliances. The cipher was meant to frame another, but he found it, and it cost him his life. Lady Eleanor's estrangement was no motive for murder her. Fear was of secrets, not guilt. Percy's greed lacked the finesse for this, not his boast's empty promises. Baxter's loyalty held firm, his boots and bruises mere missteps in the dark. But you, Mr. Trent, had access, motive, and skill. You entered through the window, using a ladder to mask your presence, and strangled him with the scarf to silence his discovery. The ashtray's upset was your only error, a clumsy grab as you fled. Trent's tic stopped, his face a mask of panic. No, you've no proof, he stammered, but Crane stepped forward, his voice a growl. Enough, Trent. We'll search your lodgings, your papers. If there's a ribbon or a ladder, you're done. Trent's shoulders slumped, his spectacles fogging as he sank into a chair, the fight gone from him. Miss Marple's eyes softened, her voice gentle. Secrets are a heavy burden, Mr. Trent. Sir Reginald trusted you, and that trust was his undoing. The room was silent, the suspect's faces a mix of shock and relief. Crane, his skepticism replaced by grudging respect, signaled to Constable Reed to take Trent. Miss Marple stepped back, her shawl slipping slightly, her umbrella a quiet anchor. Lady Conway, eyes wide, whispered, Jane, you're a wonder. But Miss Marple's thoughts were already elsewhere, the pattern complete, the truth laid bare in the room where it began. Chapter 11. The confession. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the drawing room of the Harrow residence, its golden light softening the stark memory of Sir Reginald's death. Miss Jane Marple stood near the fireplace, her small frame a quiet pillar amid the room's grandeur, her shawl draped neatly over her shoulders. The confrontation had ended with Julian Trent's collapse, his nervous tic giving way to a defeated silence as Inspector Crane's men escorted him from the room. The remaining suspects, Letty, Eleanor Harrow, Corpora Miles, Baxter, and Percy, their faces etched with a mix of shock and relief, each grappling with the truth Miss Marple had unveiled. Lady Beatrice Conway, seated near the Window fanned herself with a handkerchief, her eyes wide with awe. "Jane, you've done it." Trent, a foreign agent strangling poor Reginald to cover his tracks. "But how did you know? And what happens now?" Miss Marple's pale blue eyes, sharp yet gentle, surveyed the room, its clues now silent witnesses to a resolved tragedy. The scratched floor, the oiled window latch, the empty ashtray, the stopped clock. "The truth, Beatrice, lies in the details," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of certainty. "Mr. Trent's confession is needed, not for our satisfaction, but for justice. Inspector Crane, I trust, will see to that." Her mind turned to the cipher, Eagle Falls at dawn, and Trent's ink-smudged cuff, the missing typewriter ribbon, the tampered drawer. These had pointed to his betrayal, but the full story, she felt, required his own words to complete the pattern. Inspector Crane, his mustache no longer bristling with skepticism, re-entered the drawing room, his face a mix of grim satisfaction and reluctant admiration. Behind him, Trent shuffled, handcuffed, his spectacles askew, his tic replaced by a hollow stare. The constable at his side stood ready, but Trent's fight was gone, his shoulders slumped under the weight of exposure. Crane cleared his throat, addressing the room. "Trent's agreed to talk, Miss Marple, thanks to you. Said he'll give a full statement here, before we take him to the station. Seems he wants to clear the air, or what's left of it." His glance at Miss Marple held a grudging respect, and she nodded, settling into a chair, her umbrella resting against her knee. Trent was led to the center of the room, near the spot where Sir Reginald's body had lain. The suspects watched Eleanor's composure faltering with a faint tremor in her hand, Baxter's jaw tight with suppressed anger, Percy's florid face pale beneath its usual bluster. Trent's voice, when he spoke, was low, almost mechanical, as if reciting a rehearsed tragedy. "I didn't want it to come to this," he began, his eyes fixed on the Persian rug. "Sir Reginald was a good man, but he found something he shouldn't have, and I had no choice." Miss Marple leaned forward, her expression serene, but her mind alert, sifting his words for the threads that would complete the tapestry. "The cipher, Mr. Trent," she prompted gently. "It was yours, was it not? Tell us how it led to this room." Trent's gaze flicked to her, a flash of resentment quickly smothered by resignation. He nodded, his hands twisting in the cuffs. "It started months ago," he said. "I was approached men from a foreign power, Balkan, offering money, influence, if I'd pass information. Small things, at first diplomatic schedules, guest lists. I was in debt, you see, from mistakes in London. It seemed harmless." His voice wavered, and Miss Marple noted the shame beneath his defiance, a man trapped by his own weaknesses. "They gave me the cipher, Eagle Falls at dawn, to plant in a cable. Meant to frame a rival diplomat, sow chaos in negotiations. I typed it on the study's typewriter, hid it in a book, waiting for the right moment." Eleanor's hand tightened on her brooch, her eyes narrowing, but she said nothing. Baxter's fists clenched, his loyalty to Sir Reginald a silent rebuke. Percy, for once, was quiet, his cufflinks glinting as he shifted uncomfortably. Miss Marple's needles, silent in her bag, seemed to pulse with the rhythm of Trent's confession. "Sir Reginald found it," she said, her voice soft but firm. "That night, didn't he?" Trent nodded, his spectacles fogging slightly. "He was going through the study, late, after Percy left. He found the book, the cipher, and he knew what it meant: treason. He called me back, just before 11. I'd already left, but I returned, through the garden, using a ladder from the shed to climb to the drawing room window. I oiled the latch days before, just in case." His words were steady now, the confession unburdening him, even as it damned him. Miss Marple's mind flashed to the scratched floor, the ladder's edge marking the oak, and the oiled latch. So silent, it had fooled Baxter's rounds. "He was waiting here," Trent continued, gesturing to the room's center. Smoking, pacing, furious. He showed me the cipher, called me a traitor, said he'd report me to the Foreign Office. I begged him to listen, but he wouldn't. The scarf was on the table. He'd brought it from the study. Maybe to remind me of the Balkan envoy. I grabbed it, looped it round his neck, and pulled. It was quick, no struggle. He just fell. His voice broke, and Miss Marple saw the horror in his eyes. Not for Sir Reginald, but for the man he'd become. Crane's eyes narrowed, his pen scratching notes, but Miss Marple pressed on, her tone unwavering. The ashtray, Mr. Trent, why? Was it empty? And the clock stopped. Trent's head jerked up, as if surprised she'd noticed. I cleared the ashtray, he admitted. His cigarette stubs were there, and I didn't want anything traced. To me, I knocked it over in my haste, grabbing the table to steady myself. The clock, I stopped it, thought it might confuse the time of death, give me an edge. His candor was stark, and Miss Marple nodded. The room's anomalies now explained. The empty ashtray a calculated erasure, the stopped clock a desperate ruse, and the ladder? She asked, her voice as gentle as a lullaby. You returned it to the shed, I presume, before leaving. Trent nodded, his face ashen. I climbed down, put it back, and left through the garden gate. Baxter was on the far side of the grounds. I knew his rounds. I was back at my lodgings by 11:30, the porter none the wiser. His confession was complete, the mechanics of the crime laid bare, and Miss Marple felt the pattern settle, each clue fitting into place. The scratch, the latch, the scarf, the cipher. Eleanor rose, her voice cutting through the silence. You betrayed him, Julian, all those years, his trust. Her words trembled, not with grief, but with fury, and Miss Marple saw the depth of her isolation, a wife left in the dark by both husband and traitor. Baxter stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. You killed a good man, Trent. For what? Money. His bruised knuckles whitened, but Crane's hand on his shoulder restrained him. Percy, uncharacteristically subdued, muttered, rotten business. All of it. His cufflinks a hollow boast of unearned wealth. Miss Marple stood, her small frame commanding the room's attention. You sought to hide your treason, Mr. Trent, but this room betrayed you. The ashtray's upset, the clock's pause, the scarf's not. These were your signatures, as clear as any confession. Her voice was gentle, but its weight silenced the room. Trent's head bowed, his spectacles slipping, and Crane signaled to the constable. Take him to the station, he said, his tone gruff but respectful as he glanced at Miss Marple. You've saved us weeks, ma'am. I'll see this through. As Trent was led away, the drawing room seemed to exhale, its tension easing like a storm's passing. Eleanor sank into a chair, her composure fraying, while Baxter stood sentinel, his loyalty now a burden of memory. Percy, muttering excuses, slipped out, his bravado no match for the truth. Lady Conway rushed to Miss Marple, her voice a whisper of awe. Jane, you're a miracle. How did you piece it all together? But Miss Marple's eyes were distant, her thoughts on the cost of secrets, the fragility of trust. She gathered her umbrella, smoothing her shawl. People, Beatrice, are their own unraveling. Mr. Trent wove a clever web, but the smallest thread's ink, a scratch, a misplaced ribbon, brought it down. She stepped toward the door, the drawing room's opulence now a quiet requiem for Sir Reginald's lost peace. Crane, lingering, offered a stiff nod. We'll need your statement, Miss Marple, but you've done the heavy lifting. The Foreign Office will want this hushed, I reckon. Miss Marple nodded, her mind already turning to the village beyond, where whispers would soon carry the tale of a traitor unmasked. Chapter 12. The quiet of Embassy Row. The autumn afternoon draped Upper Cranston in a golden hush. The leaves of Embassy Row's ancient elms, drifting like embers to the cobbles below, Miss Jane Marple sat in Lady Beatrice Conway's parlor, a delicate teacup cradled in her hands, her knitting a soft heap of blue wool beside her. The confession of Julian Trent. Unmasked as a foreign agent who strangled Sir Reginald Harrow to conceal his treason, had settled the mystery. Its threads decipher the Balkan scarf, the scratched floor, the empty ashtray woven into a pattern of betrayal. Yet the resolution, though just left a lingering melancholy, a reminder of trust shattered and lives altered. Lady Conway, pouring a fresh pot of tea, was still alight with the thrill of it all. "Jane, you're a marvel. Trent in cuffs, the village abuzz, and all because of your sharp eyes. But what now? Will Eleanor stay, or is Embassy Row done for?" Miss Marple's pale blue eyes, gentle but piercing, gazed out the window, where the Harrow residence stood sentinel, its red brick facade softened by ivy, but heavy with memory. "The truth brings peace, Beatrice, but not always comfort," she said softly. "Lady Eleanor and the others must find their way forward, as must Upper Cranston. For my part, I shall return to St. Mary Mead, where my roses need tending." Her voice held a quiet finality, but her mind lingered on the human frailties exposed: Trent's greed, Eleanor's isolation, Baxter's burdened loyalty, Percy's hollow bravado. Lady Conway leaned forward, her curiosity undimmed. "But Jane, tell me, how will they fare? And what of the Foreign Office? Surely they'll sweep this spy business under the rug." Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile, her needles silent but her thoughts as precise as their rhythm. "Let us take tea and consider," she said, "for the aftermath of a crime is often its truest story." The Harrow residence, Miss Marple learned through Beatrice's tireless gossip, was already shifting. Lady Eleanor, her composure now tempered by a visible weariness, had announced plans to sell the house. The memories of Sir Reginald's death, coupled with the betrayal of Trent, whom she had tolerated but never trusted, were too heavy a burden. "She's off to her sister's in Devon," Lady Conway reported, her tone a mix of sympathy and relish. "Says she wants a quieter life, perhaps with her sketching. That artist, Mr. Langley, might follow, if the village whispers are true." Miss Marple nodded, her mind recalling Eleanor's fleeting flush when questioned about the scarf. Not guilt, but the strain of a marriage hollowed by secrets. Devon, she thought, might offer the solace Eleanor had long sought. Corporal Miles, Baxter, ever the steadfast soldier, had resumed his duties, though with a new assignment. The Foreign Office, keen to distance itself from the scandal, had arranged for him to guard a minor consulate in the north, a post that suited his taciturn loyalty. "He's proud, in his way," Lady Conway said, "but you can see the weight. On him losing Sir Reginald hit him hard." Miss Marple's eyes softened, remembering Baxter's bruised knuckles and soiled boots. Marks of a man who had stumbled in the dark but held fast to his honor. His grief, she felt, would fade in time, replaced by the quiet pride of duty done. Percy Harrow, true to form, had slunk back to London, his boasts of wealth silenced by the truth of his cousin's murder. The Red Lion's publican had let slip that Percy's gift of cufflinks came from a pawnbroker's loan, a desperate bid to keep up appearances. "He's after a job now, or so he claims," Lady Conway said, her laughter sharp, clerking, of all things. "Imagine Percy with a ledger." Miss Marple's smile was wry, her thoughts on Percy's clumsy hands, so ill-suited to the scarfs. Precise not. His desperation had made him a suspect, but his chastening, she hoped, might lead to a humbler path. The Foreign Office, as Crane had predicted, moved swiftly to hush the affair. The cipher Eagle falls at dawn, and Trent's treason were classified, the Balkan envoy quietly recalled, under diplomatic pretense. Inspector Crane, in a rare moment of candor over tea with Lady Conway, admitted the case would be buried in reports. Trent's trial, a closed affair to avoid international ripples. "They're calling it a domestic tragedy," he grumbled, his mustache twitching. "But we know better, thanks to you, Miss Marple. She had nodded, her expression serene, but her mind noted the irony. A village spinster had unraveled what Whitehall wished to conceal. Miss Marple rose, smoothing her shawl, her black umbrella in hand, as she prepared to leave the villa. The parlor's warmth, the clink of teacups, the rustle of leaves beyond the window, these were the ordinary comforts that grounded her after the storm of human folly. Lady Conway followed her to the door, her voice soft with admiration. "You've left your mark, Jane. Upper Cranston won't forget this, nor will I. Will you come back, if another mystery stirs?" Miss Marple paused, her eyes drifting to Embassy Row, where the Harrow House stood, its windows catching the last light. "Mysteries find us, Beatrice, whether we seek them or not," she said, her voice a gentle cadence. "But for now, my garden calls, and I must answer." She stepped outside, the cobbles cool beneath her feet, and glanced back at the village, its quiet lanes now free of the shadow that had haunted them. As she walked toward the station, her thoughts turned to the human heart, so often its own undoing. Trent's ambition, cloaked in loyalty, had led him to betrayal. Eleanor's restraint had hidden her pain. Baxter's duty had borne his grief. Percy's greed had masked his shame. The drawing room's clues, the scratch, the latch, the ashtray. The clock had been mere echoes of these truths, guiding her to the killer. Her needles, tucked in her bag, seemed to click in rhythm with her reflections. A soft requiem for Sir Reginald's lost peace. The train to St. Mary Mead awaited, its whistle a distant promise of home. Miss Marple boarded, her small frame settling by a window, the countryside unfolding in a blur of green and gold. Upper Cranston, with its secrets and sorrows, receded, but its lessons lingered. People, she murmured to herself, are so often their own unraveling. The train moved on, carrying her back to her roses, her village, her quiet life, so the next pattern called her to its threads.